Why are you here? Despite our completely cold marriage. My husband Steve said he wanted to celebrate my birthday at a fancy restaurant. I suspected he was up to something, and indeed. His mistress was also waiting at the restaurant. I wanted to celebrate your birthday too. This is a birthday present from both me and your husband. The present was a divorce paper. What a tasteless surprise. But in return, I handed something over that would bring Steve and his mistress down. Instead, I present this to you. My final gift to you. Seeing this, the two of them ended up pleading for forgiveness in a pitiful manner. My name is Alyssa. I used to work as an office worker at a corporation, but due to Steve's wishes, I am now a full-time housewife. Steve and I got to know each other as we started at the same company and shared common interests. He was good at talking and sweet-talking. I fell for him and actively pursued a relationship, which led to marriage. Vulnerable to my feelings for him, I tended to comply with his demands from the beginning of our relationship, thinking it would keep our relationship harmonious. Steve often made aggressive demands, taking advantage of my attitude. Highly regarded at his company and on a career track, Steve focused on his work and insisted that I quit my job to become a housewife after we married. But I like my current job, and I've just been entrusted with a project. No matter how hard a woman like Alyssa tries, she can't outperform me, right? It's better for you to support me by taking care of the home now. I thought, is that so? Although I still wanted to continue working, I convinced myself that maybe Steve was right, and ultimately quit my job when we got married. Even after marriage, Steve continued to assert his beliefs. Hey, I was thinking of visiting my parents next holiday. Steve, maybe you could. You know I hate such bothersome stuff. I'm tired from work, so I want time for myself on holidays. You should just go alone since they are your parents. Steve never met my parents again after our wedding greetings and the ceremony. While I occasionally visited my parents, Steve never accompanied me. I rationalized that he was just not good at handling personal relationships. But it still saddened me to see my beloved parents treated dismissively. Our marriage continued like this for 10 years. How was your day? I was just making your favorite dish. I greeted Steve cheerily as he returned from work. However, upon seeing my face, he sighed annoyedly. Ah. I'm tired of that. It feels like you're holding it over me. I don't need dinner today. I just came home to sleep, and I have to get up early tomorrow, so leave me alone. He coldly stated and quickly retreated to his room, leaving me staring miserably at his back. I thought, today too, he didn't eat it. Whether it's because he's busy with work or not. Steve often comes home late these days, and I try to make him comfortable at home by cooking his favorite foods daily. However, Steve usually eats out, rarely having the meals I prepare. Still, as a housewife, I continued to cook and waited for his return. I thought, I wonder when we started drifting apart like this. Tears welled up in my eyes as I wrapped the uneaten food and placed it in the refrigerator. Initially, our marriage was going well, but as Steve rose to a managerial position, the stress seemed to increase, and he became less communicative at home. I kept trying to talk to him, but he only got more irritable, making all my efforts futile. I hoped time would heal things, but as days passed, the gap between us deepened. I kept telling myself that his aggression was due to his busy schedule. All I could do was to wait quietly at home, not provoking Steve's temper. However, an incident that trampled on my feelings happened one day. It all started when Steve came home and was in the shower, and our home phone rang. Hello? Hello, is this the director's home? It seems he left his smartphone at the office. The caller sounded like a young woman. Oh, well, thank you for calling. He's currently in the shower, but I'll let him know once he's out. Is that so? Well, then I'll bring it over. I know where he lives. No, that won't be necessary. I'll have him pick it up later, please don't worry. I have time, so it's okay. I'll head over now. Despite being pushy, she ended up bringing Steve's smartphone. Steve, your colleague said she's bringing over a smartphone you forgot. It was a young woman's voice. So, I see. Okay. I told this to Steve as he got out of the shower, and he visibly looked uneasy. About an hour after the call, our doorbell rang. When I answered, I heard the voice of the woman from the phone. I opened the door, and there stood a woman in her early 20s. Nice to meet you. Are you the wife? Is Steve here? With a look that men might like, miniskirt and heavy makeup, she spoke in a coquettish tone as she peeked into our house. I intuitively disliked her vibe. Megan, sorry to trouble you. Steve passed by me to stand in front of the woman he called Megan, exchanging casual conversation as he took the smartphone. However, their overly friendly demeanor made me feel uncomfortable. Sorry for the late hour, I'll be leaving now. See you, Steve. With that, she left. The door slammed shut, leaving only the strong scent of her branded perfume behind. You seem to get along well with your colleague. What's with that all of a sudden? Megan is just a colleague. Yet Megan calls you Steve so casually. Despite being addressed as director over the phone. The woman had deliberately called him Steve in my hearing when she visited. She's just very friendly. She calls everyone by their first names, not just me. Friendly, huh? Ah, so that's why she knew our house. Even though she's never been invited to a boss's home. She came without hesitation, she must have a good memory. What are you trying to say? My probing words finally made my husband Steve snap. I normally don't confront him like this. But I had a woman's intuition that he might have a mistress. I hadn't investigated her yet, but I was sure that Megan from earlier was the one. So I pressed the issue with passion. You always said you were late from work, but could there be another reason? You might think you've kept it hidden from me, but it's obvious. The times when Steve was busy at work and became cold towards me matched up. It could only mean one thing, infidelity. Why don't you just admit it? Shut up, it was just a fling. So, you admit to cheating? I was stressed from work, and when she invited me, I just lost it. It was just dinner, nothing physical. That doesn't count as cheating, does it? Steve finally admitted to cheating after my persistent questioning. But he insisted that it wasn't a physical relationship. However, judging by their demeanor, it couldn't have been just platonic. But at the moment, I had no evidence to pursue it further. So what if I cheated? What are you going to do about it? Divorce? There's no way you, a housewife with a career gap, can find a job if you leave me. You'd struggle financially without me. Steve sneered at me, ignoring his own actions. As he said, I hadn't worked for 10 years. It would likely be tough to find a job if I tried. Knowing this, Steve was confident that I wouldn't dare file for divorce even if he cheated. You rely on me for support, and you have the nerve. There's no reason for you to bash me just because I talked to a younger girl. I've had enough. I ended the conversation, disgusted by Steve's lack of apology. Ha! Maybe you're jealous of a beautiful young woman. I don't know, but a housewife should just quietly obey me. Steve sneered and spat out those words before returning to the living room. I had tried to ignore it to protect my own feelings. But it was clear he was looking down on me. There was no trust left between us. Despite how much I had loved him, this incident cooled my feelings rapidly. I thought, I won't let him get away with this. I'll make sure he apologizes. Secretly, I vowed to take revenge on my husband, Steve. I thought it was time to use a power that Steve didn't know I had. After that, I continued on with my daily routines superficially. Steve's homecomings remained unapologetically late. And the only thing I changed was stopping to cook meals for him. Once when he came home and asked where's dinner, I told him I had no interest in cooking for someone whose return time was unpredictable. He angrily declared he'd never eat my cooking again. As our marriage continued to grow colder, one day, as my birthday approached, Steve surprisingly initiated a conversation. "Alyssa, I've made a reservation for your birthday at a restaurant." It had been years since he'd celebrated my birthday. Wondering what sudden change of wind had prompted this, I didn't press further but thanked him, looking forward to it. I wasn't sure what he was planning. However, from his attitude and demeanor, it was clear he wasn't genuinely interested in celebrating my birthday. I decided it might be wise to prepare something in advance. I planned to deliver a major blow to both Steve and his mistress Megan. On my birthday, Steve truly had made a reservation at the restaurant. It was a high-end establishment often featured in magazines. We were led inside by the staff, and Steve and I headed to our table. However, an unbelievable person was already sitting there. "Why are you here?" "Oh, ma'am, long time no see. I wanted to celebrate your birthday too," I asked Steve. Just like when she had visited our home. There she was with her revealing outfit and heavy makeup. It was Steve's mistress, Megan. "What is this about?" I questioned Steve, who was sitting next to me. But he feigned ignorance and didn't answer. "Oh, come on, sit down. You'll understand everything once you see this," Megan said, thrusting a piece of paper in front of me. "This is happy birthday from me and Steve." It was a divorce form, already signed in the husband's section by Steve. "I'm tired of our life together. I want a divorce." What a tasteless surprise. You went through the trouble of reserving a restaurant. You could have just handed me the divorce papers normally. But you chose to mock me to the end, didn't you? "Oh, come on, we just wanted to have a nice meal and then part ways cleanly." Megan smirked malevolently, watching my reaction. This distasteful setup was likely her idea. It's like a little joke, isn't it? Were you that shocked? Did you really think I'd celebrate your birthday for real? I'm not so naive. I suspected you were up to something. But I didn't expect such an incomprehensible surprise. "Oh, are you making excuses now?" "That's right, I lost. I'll give you the boring man who enjoys ridiculing others with his mistress. I'll submit this myself." I picked up the divorce form from the table. "Instead, I'm giving you this as a present. My final gift to you. Read it carefully." I placed a letter I had prepared in advance on the table and turned to leave the restaurant. Behind me, I could hear their contemptuous laughter. Without taking my meal, I left the restaurant, ignoring the puzzled waiter. With the divorce form in hand, I quickly headed to a specific place. I knew that divorce forms could be submitted 24 hours a day. Fortunately, the office was nearby. I started walking to submit the divorce form immediately. I wanted to sever ties with that man as soon as possible. As I thought, the office was still open. Finally, I would be free from that man. As I was about to enter, I heard someone loudly calling my name. Hey! Alyssa! Wait, please wait. At the entrance of the office, Steve, having noticed me, called out to stop me. He must have rushed here because he was panting heavily. Megan, his mistress, was also there. Her hair a mess compared to how it looked at the restaurant. Likely because she too had run after me. What do you want? I knew they had chased after me because of the letter I had left. But I asked innocently, pretending not to understand. The divorce was a joke. The affair, all of it, was just a story to get your attention. It was a surprise, you know? We've been in a rut, haven't we? What a desperate excuse. It's true. I was just helping the director with a surprise. Ignoring their frantic explanations, I continued towards the entrance of the city office. They were only changing their tune because they had read that letter. In the letter, I had revealed that the president of a major company crucial to Steve's employer was actually my father. Steve knew that my father ran a company. But because he had not met him since our wedding, and our family name was common, he never realized that the president of the client company was my dad. Knowing the truth, Steve must have turned pale because with my father's influence, firing both of them would be easy. We can still fix this. I want you to come back. Please, I'm begging you. Steve was on his knees in front of the busy city office, not caring who saw. Megan, too, knelt down beside him. Clearly, they were afraid of losing their jobs. Oh, it's too late for that. Sorry to have you make such a pathetic show, but I've already filed the divorce papers. You were about to go into the office building. Stop lying. Sorry to have raised your hopes, but I actually left my bag at the counter. I was just going back to get it. We're already strangers. With that, I showed them my hands, emphasizing that I didn't have my bag. They must have thought they caught up with me before I could file the papers. But I had already submitted the divorce application. So, damn. You'll regret divorcing a husband who didn't cheat. Is that all? Just took a surprise too seriously? Can't you take a joke? Despite their rush to prevent me from filing the divorce papers, their efforts were in vain. And they started to hurl insults in frustration again. Still pretending to be innocent, are you? I've already collected enough evidence to prove your affair. Evidence? Yes. You thought I would tolerate the cheating because I'd struggle financially after a divorce. But I'm not the kind of woman to stay silent after being ridiculed. I had hired a detective agency to monitor them, and indeed, they were frequently meeting in secret. There were photos of them entering a hotel together, cozy and intimate. They could no longer claim there was no physical relationship. No matter how much you deny the affair, I have all the evidence. From now on, you'll be hearing from my lawyer. Look forward to paying a substantial amount in damages. As I smiled and delivered these words, the two were left speechless. No. Don't leave me. I just gave in to temptation. You are the one for me. Then, Steve got up and clung to me, sobbing. Stop it, you're pathetic. Saying things you don't mean just because you don't want to lose your job. You should be with that young girl instead of an old woman like me. Even as I tried to pull away, Steve clung to me, crying loudly. As I wondered what to do, a patrolling police officer approached us, asking what was happening. I explained the situation, and they detained Steve. Why is this happening? Steve was sprawled on the ground, seemingly crying. "It's all your own doing. Goodbye." I left him in the care of the police, bid farewell to Steve, and walked away. Later, through my lawyer, I pursued damages, including slavery under cheating from Steve. With all the evidence of infidelity in place, he reluctantly agreed to pay the compensation. When I told my parents about the divorce and its reasons, they were furious. They never liked Steve much, especially since he had avoided them. My father confronted their company about the lack of employee discipline. The executives, faced with my father's fury, pleaded for him to calm down, promising strict actions against Steve and Megan. Steve was demoted and transferred to a regional office, effectively removed from the corporate fast track. Megan was transferred as well, and their affair became a scandal within the company, leading to their eventual resignation due to the hostile work environment. Rumors say that after resigning, their financial situation was dire. Megan started working nights to support him. But Steve, unable to handle his fall from grace, became unemployed. Eventually, Megan, tired of their constant quarreling, left Steve, who then spiraled into mistrust and isolation, now living on social welfare and remaining indoors. While I felt some pity for how far he had fallen, it was all a result of his own actions, having taken his wife for granted and indulged in his whims. However, I recognize my own faults too. By always yielding to Steve's demands and enduring, I allowed his arrogant behavior to escalate. I am now working as an office worker in my father's company, where I met a single manager with whom I share a respectful and communicative relationship. We plan to marry soon, applying the lessons from my failed marriage with Steve. Seeing my new partner enjoy my cooking every day, I feel confident that this time I will find true happiness with a trustworthy partner.
The crumpled eviction notice slipped from my fingers, fluttering softly to the polished wood floors. I stared at the offensive piece of paper, bile rising in my throat as I absorbed the callous words. "Your continued occupation of the premises is no longer welcomed. Vacate within 30 days or legal action will be pursued." No name, no explanation, just a cold command typed out on my mother-in-law's letterhead. After 12 years of living in this house, I was being kicked to the curb like yesterday's trash. I shook my head sharply, as if trying to wake myself from this nightmare. But the stark black words on the page remained unchanged. Marlene did this. It had to be her. Ever since I married her precious son Theo 5 years ago, she had made her disdain for me abundantly clear. In her esteemed opinion, I was too common, too plain, and too barren to be a fitting wife. My fingers curled into fists as hot anger flooded my chest. This went beyond petty grievances with the overbearing matriarch. No, Theo had to be complicit in this scheme to cast me out of my own home. The man I loved and trusted had betrayed me in the worst possible way. Bile continued to rise in my throat as my mind raced over the past few months. The growing distance between Theo and I, the lengthening work hours, the mysterious phone calls he would abruptly end whenever I entered the room. Like puzzle pieces clicking into place, it all started to make horrible sense. I sank down onto the cold marble floors, the eviction notice still glaring relentlessly from where it had landed. Hugo, my tabby cat, nudged his head against my elbow, disturbed by the dark storm clouds gathering around me. I stroked his back reflexively, drawing comfort from his warm, rumbling purr. At least I still had Hugo on my side. That was more than I could say for my traitorous husband and his insidious mother. As I sat there, the 12 years I had spent in this house washed over me like a tide. Theo presenting me with the key the day after our honeymoon, beaming with pride to make me mistress of this magnificent estate. Long summer days lounging by the pool with my friends, glasses of crisp rosé in hand. Curled up with Theo by the crackling fire on winter nights, safe in the circle of his strong arms, I swallowed hard past the lump in my throat. Were all those memories just pretty illusions? Had my marriage to Theo been nothing but an elaborate sham this entire time? The painted walls around me now seemed like a gilded cage, trapping me inside a role I no longer played. Mistress of the manor, lady of the house. Those titles had been ripped away, replaced now with unwelcome occupant. Everything I had known, this house, my marriage, my hopes of starting a family one day, had been built on quicksand. And now I was sinking into an abyss of anger, betrayal, and bone-deep hurt. I rose on wobbly legs, shaking off Hugo's concerned nudges. Padding quietly through the empty halls, I entered my bedroom with trepidation. Theo's smells still lingered. His musky cologne, the peppermint hair gel he used religiously each morning. But for the first time, those familiar scents made my stomach curdle with resentment instead of affection. I sank down on the massive four-poster bed, its plush duvet suddenly feeling frivolous and wasteful. I should have known a marriage crafted from convenience instead of passion could never withstand the tests of time. Theo had needed a polite, presentable wife to silence his mother's complaints. I had needed financial security after my first failed marriage left me penniless. On paper, we made perfect sense. But the contracts of marriage run deeper than what's on paper. They require trust, communication, compromise, all things painfully absent from my relationship with Theo. I rose and began yanking open dresser drawers, no longer caring about the racket I was making. Let them hear what damage their callous actions had wrought. I recklessly swept aside neat stacks of ironed clothing, not even folding them properly in my haste. My hands closed around the fake bottom I had installed in his drawer years ago. Popping it open, I retrieved the flash drive concealed beneath, clutching it tightly. If Theo thought he could discard me so easily, he was sorely mistaken. I was taking this insurance policy with me. I woke with a start, momentarily confused by my unfamiliar surroundings. Rather than the king-size sleigh bed I'd shared with Theo, I was curled up on the lumpy sofa bed in my tiny rental apartment. The previous day came crashing back, the confrontation with Theo over my eviction, my furious packing, his half-hearted excuses about financial difficulties. I had spat back that money seemed plentiful enough for him to afford a fancy new condo for his mistress. Theo's face had drained of color. Who told you that? He sputtered. I found out all on my own, I hissed. I know you've been siphoning money from our accounts for months. Did you really think I wouldn't notice $10,000 a month disappearing? He raked a hand through his hair, refusing to meet my livid gaze. Alara, I swear, she didn't mean anything to me. It was just a stupid fling. Save it, I snapped, clenching my fist so I wouldn't succumb to my urge to slap him. This isn't about her. This is about you lying to my face, betraying our vows, and deceiving me. I turned on my heel, abandoning him to deal with the movers. My departure was satisfyingly dramatic, but my triumph soon faded, replaced by bone-deep hurt and anger. I rose unsteadily from the lumpy couch, my back protesting yesterday's frenzied activity. At least Theo's credit card had been useful for furnishing this depressingly bare apartment. I hoped the $5,000 bill gave him a nice slap in the face. I filled Hugo's food bowl on autopilot, my thoughts churning darkly. How could I have missed all the signs these past few months? Thinking back, it was painfully obvious. Theo's late nights at work, his constant distraction whenever we talked, the locked study I was now barred from entering. An icy sensation trickled down my spine. The locked study. In my hurried packing yesterday, I'd forgotten to retrieve my laptop stashed in there. Cursing under my breath, I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. Time for another unwanted trip to the scene of this betrayal. Maybe I'd accidentally smashed something expensive on my way out. 20 minutes later, I stood outside the formidable wrought iron gates that marked the entrance to what used to be my home. I stared bitterly at the ostentatious double doors and sprawling columns. What a fool I'd been, thinking I belonged behind those gilded walls. Squaring my shoulders, I strode up the winding driveway, steeling myself for another confrontation. Before I could knock, the door was wrenched open abruptly. Marlene's piercing eyes raked over me disdainfully. Well, well, I thought I made myself clear about you not being welcome here anymore, she said coldly. Behind her tailored skirt and silk blouse, I caught a glimpse of suitcases stacked in the foyer. My eyes narrowed. Going somewhere, Marlene? That's none of your concern. State your business and then kindly leave. I crossed my arms. I need to get some personal items from the study. It will just take a moment. Over her shoulder, I noticed Theo descending the curved staircase, his normal polish slightly diminished. His suit was badly wrinkled and his face sallow and drawn, but my long dormant sympathy remained buried deep. He had made his bed by betraying our marriage. Now he could lie in it. "Let her get her things, Mother," he said tiredly, avoiding my accusatory stare. Might as well avoid another scene. Marlene huffed in annoyance but remained stubbornly blocking the doorway. Sighing, I shouldered past her roughly. Her affronted gasp followed me as I stormed down the hallway to the locked study. Fishing the key from my bag with trembling fingers, I shoved it in the lock vindictively. As expected, the study was in complete disarray. Papers scattered, drawers hanging open haphazardly, remnants of my missing belongings strewn across the floor. I spotted my laptop under a chair and quickly stashed it in my bag. As I turned to leave, I paused, struck by the chaotic sight. Something wasn't adding up. Marlene's packed suitcases, this ransacked room. It hinted at something much darker lurking beneath the surface. I slowly circled the room, taking in details that eluded me during my angry packing frenzy yesterday. Bank statements and unopened bills littered the floor alongside flashy jewelry store receipts. My investigator's instincts, dormant since my divorce attorney days, switched on. Methodically sorting through the paper trails, a shocking narrative emerged. Excessive spending well beyond our means, panicked credit card applications clearly denied, final foreclosure warnings from the bank. Rocking back on my heels, I struggled to absorb this new reality on top of yesterday's revelations. Not only had Theo betrayed our marriage, but his reckless spending had torpedoed us into financial ruin without my knowledge. No wonder Marlene was so desperate to cast me out of her perfect palace. Clutching the damning evidence to my chest, I strode out of the study with newfound purpose. Theo and Marlene had played me for a fool, manipulating me like their own personal puppet. But the show was over. This victim had found her voice, and there would be hell to pay. Armed with the damning evidence tucked securely in my bag, I strode towards the front door with righteous fury pumping through my veins. Theo and Marlene had treated me like a disposable pawn for too long. Now it was time for their despicable web of lies to come crashing down. Marlene blocked my way as I tried to storm past, her talon-like nails digging into my forearm. "Just where do you think you're going with those private documents?" she hissed. I wrenched my arm free, getting right in her pinched face. "First, don't ever touch me again. Second, your financial records stopped being private when you used my name to take out massive loans. I'm taking this evidence and contacting my divorce lawyer." Theo rushed over, his tired eyes wide with panic. "Alara, please, be reasonable. We're undergoing a temporary cash flow issue, that's all. Mother has already made arrangements to cover it." His platitudes only stoked my rage hotter. "Oh, so pilfering my personal accounts without consent and racking up secret credit card debt constitutes just a minor issue in your book?" I scoffed bitterly. "I saw the denied applications and final foreclosure notices, Theo. Your lies stop here." Theo paled while Marlene's painted lips flattened into a hard line, her beady eyes shooting daggers. I almost laughed at how the perfectly coiffed vulture resembled a ruffled hen with her feathers in a bunch. "You clearly don't grasp the gravity of this situation," Marlene bit out. "My son is facing financial ruin if word of this gets out. Is dragging our family name through the mud really necessary just to satisfy some petty revenge fantasy?" Red-hot anger licked through my veins. This woman dared insinuate I would invent financial crime just for revenge? Before I could retort, she charged on, clutching Theo close to her bony chest. "All my son did was try to maintain a lifestyle you eagerly enjoyed the fruits of for years. And how do you repay that generosity? By exposing his understandable missteps to bring us all down out of spite." Theo gently extricated himself from her claw-like grip. "Alara has a right to be upset, Mother," he said tiredly, still refusing to meet my eyes. "I should have been honest about our situation from the start." I crossed my arms, unswayed by his half-hearted display of accountability. "Well, it's too little, too late for that now. I'm contacting my lawyer this afternoon to file for divorce. And I won't hesitate to disclose evidence of fraud." Marlene's bony hand flew to her throat dramatically, while Theo slumped against the wall. For all their pretenses of power and control, one whiff of consequences had them quaking in their expensive Italian leather shoes. Pathetic. I stepped forward until only inches separated me from Marlene's wild eyes. Here are your options. You can contest the divorce and force this evidence into public record, destroying what remains of your family name and fortune. Or you can sign the papers, providing me a reasonable settlement, and pray I show mercy by staying silent. I strode away, heels clicking crisply on the polished floors. At the front door I paused without turning around. You have 24 hours to decide. Choose wisely. The heavy oak door slammed behind me with an air of finality. I slid behind the wheel of my car, hands shaking as I cranked the engine. Now that my adrenaline was fading, the gravity of what just happened sank in. I had confronted my deceitful husband and manipulative mother-in-law head-on. And instead of playing the victim as they expected, I had seized control and dictated the terms going forward. No more cowering or shrinking myself to fit their twisted expectations. The doormat they had trampled on so gleefully was finally demanding respect. As I pulled through the imposing gates onto the quiet suburban street, I caught a glimpse of Hugo's plushy face peeking through the back windshield, my breath hitched in my throat. In the chaos of that toxic household, I had nearly forgotten about my sweet Tabby. An unfamiliar sensation pricked behind my eyelids. I swiped at them fiercely as I accelerated down the tree-lined road. How could I have left my loyal companion, my sole source of comfort during many lonely nights, alone with those monsters? What kind of guardian abandons her defenseless kitty like that? My hands clenched the wheel tightly. Enough second-guessing myself. There would be plenty of time for regret later. Right now, I needed to focus and stick to the plan. I would wrap up my affairs quickly and efficiently before setting us both free from this toxic situation. Soon, sweet Hugo and I would be far away, starting fresh in a place where no one knew our names. Just a woman and her cat against the world. Terrifying, yes. But anything seemed better than staying trapped in this twisted web of betrayal and lies. 2 weeks had passed since I stormed out of Theo and Marlene's den of lies. In that time, I had booked us 2 one-way tickets far away from this town and its superficial social scene, somewhere I could remake myself without judgmental eyes tracking my every move. The divorce was progressing rapidly now that Theo had acquiesced to my demands, perhaps hoping I would show mercy if he played nicely. But I harbored no misguided sympathy for the man who had deceived and used me for years. His pleas for another chance now rang hollow when I reflected on all the nights I had cried myself to sleep, wondering what I did wrong, why I couldn't get pregnant, no matter how hard we tried. At least I found grim satisfaction in witnessing his empire of lies crumble. Without my financial contributions and social connections, Theo's business deals rapidly dried up. Under scrutiny from investors about some accounting discrepancies, his scheming mother was booted from the board of directors, losing her seat of domineering power. She had always prioritized profits over ethics. Now, with their dirty laundry aired like musty old sheets, the Jennings name attracted only wary side eyes and hushed gossip instead of envy. Good riddance. Let the vultures circle and the wolves descend. They made this bed. Now they could lie in the ruins that remained. The day before my departure, I found myself reluctantly driving past the cul-de-sac that once led to such a grand house of lies. Grim satisfaction flooded me at the sight of the imposing wrought-iron gates now obstructed with somber eviction signs rather than luxurious gardens. But peering closer, I spotted an elderly woman lingering alone with her suitcase on the sidewalk, wildly dialing some number. As she turned, recognition slammed me in the gut. Marlene's once commanding presence had diminished into a frail, defeated shell of her former self. Her arrogance had crumpled alongside the financial empire she was so proud of. An uncomfortable twinge stirred in my chest before I quashed it down. I owed that woman nothing, least of all my pity or sympathy. Her own ruthless ambition had led her here. I intend to drive on, leaving Marlene surrounded by the ruins of everything her vile plots had built. But Hugo meowed loudly, gazing back with imploring eyes. Cursing myself for a soft-hearted fool, I pulled to the curb and lowered the passenger window. "Do you need some help?" I asked baldly, still unwilling to show warmth despite her circumstances. Marlene started at my voice before gathering herself hurriedly. We had to vacate the premises so the bank could take inventory for auction, she said stiffly. I sighed. Even now, unable to ask for help outright. Do you need a ride somewhere? Her fingers fidgeted with her ostentatious wedding ring, the impressive diamonds now looking gaudy and excessive. I was meant to stay with my cousin Gerald for the time being, but it appears his hospitality has expired. My mouth flattened into a thin line. Even her own family was fed up dealing with the fallout from her machinations. And Theo clearly wasn't around to handle his discarded mess of a mother. Another impatient meow decided me. Put your bag in the back next to Hugo. You can stay with me until you figure something else out. Surprise flickered across her tight features. That is quite an unexpected gesture after, well, everything. I shrugged, unwilling to rehash the past. I'm leaving town tomorrow anyway. Consider us temporary roommates. I left the implied time frame of 24 hours or less hanging between us. The drive to my tiny rental passed in silence until we pulled into the faded lot. Marlene took in the cracked paint and missing shingles with thinly veiled distaste. It has a certain rustic charm, she ventured half-heartedly before following me inside. I busied myself pouring food for Hugo, who had taken an immediate liking to our new houseguest. Meanwhile, Marlene lingered awkwardly before perching on the very edge of the couch. Our forced intimacy felt surreal after over a decade of cold disregard from both sides. As we picked at leftover takeout later on, polite strains of conversation gave way to candid reflections about the future, prompted perhaps by the bottle of wine I dug up. I discovered Marlene's dream of teaching music one day. In turn, I confessed my burning desire to move somewhere warm and sunny, far removed from the Illumina social fishbowl, to take up gardening. For a few strange hours, we were just two souls making sense of life's wreckage, minus the history of wounds and grudges between us. But the wine eventually dwindled along with our stilted camaraderie. As we turned in for the night, tomorrow's uncertainties settled back upon us like a leaden weight. I jolted awake the next morning, momentarily forgetting about my unexpected houseguest. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee drew me out to the cramped kitchenette. Marlene stood rigidly by the ancient stove, wisps of gray hair escaping her normally immaculate updo. I hope you don't mind me taking the liberty of preparing breakfast, she said uncertainly. I shrugged, accepting the proffered mug. Thanks. I'm not much of a cook anyway. As we ate yogurt and granola in awkward silence, I mulled over this surreal situation. Just yesterday, Marlene was an iconic socialite. Today she was humbled and adrift, taking refuge in my modest rental. Fate certainly loved poetic twists, the haughty queen dethroned and dependent on a princess she had scorned for years. I couldn't deny feeling a slight buzz of schadenfreude watching Marlene in yesterday's rumpled Chanel grimace at the dated avocado appliances. I cleared our dishes brusquely, anxious to escape this strange familiarity. Marlene lingered at the table, gnawing her lip. Have you given any thought to what comes next, after? Her unspoken words hung heavy between us. After she left here. After I moved away to start fresh. After the final guillotine blade of divorce severed me from the only life I'd known for 12 years. I scrubbed the plates harder, avoiding her piercing gaze as I pretended fascination with a bit of stuck egg. The truth was I actively resisted peering too far down the lonely road of singlehood stretching before me. Despite everything, searing pain gripped my heart, imagining never seeing Theo's crooked smile first thing in the morning, or hearing his off-key singing in the shower. Through betrayal and deception, parts of me still clung to the comforting refuge of us. Of course, I couldn't confess these weak sentiments to Marlene. Clearing my throat roughly, I turned to face her with forced conviction. I have a flight booked to Arizona for later today. Once there, I'll start job hunting so I can afford a small place just for me and Hugo. My voice hitched slightly over our names. Eventually, I might even try dating again, but for now, it's enough to just live simply without toxic people around. I expected Marlene to flinch at the thinly veiled barb. Instead, her eyes softened with what looked strangely like empathy. The future is often murkier than our best-laid plans anticipate, she said slowly. Perhaps if I had adopted your openness to unexpected possibilities years ago, things would have played out quite differently. I raised a skeptical eyebrow, certain this was a transparent attempt to diminish her culpability. But Marlene raised a staying hand. You owe me nothing, least of all an audience for my regrets. Suffice it to say that pride and fear of vulnerability blinded me to what truly mattered until it was too late. She glanced down, blinking rapidly, while I shifted awkwardly. I had steeled myself to confront Marlene's haughty indifference once more, only to be thrown by this display of humility. But I hesitantly filled the silence, voicing a question that had plagued me for years. Why did you dislike me so intensely from the beginning? I tried everything to win your approval and make Theo happy. My voice cracked pathetically on his name. So much for indifference. Marlene seemed to fold into herself, and for the first time I glimpsed hints of a heavy burden weighing down her ramrod posture. You represented warmth, spontaneity, sincerity, everything I lost touch with long ago in my quest for the perfect family image. She gazed out the dingy window. Rather than inspire me to reconnect with life's joys, your vibrancy only magnified my own isolation, so I sought to diminish what I envied. Her poignant confession landed between us with the weight of a thrown gauntlet, unexpected but impossible to ignore. I sank slowly onto a creaking chair, shoulders slumping, too exhausted to even summon anger over so many wasted years chained to her warped insecurities and judgments. Perhaps sensing my fatigue, Marlene lightly touched my shoulder. The past can't be altered, but the future awaits whatever we choose to carry forward or leave behind. With that enigmatic remark, she quietly retreated to the bathroom, granting me space to process this overdue revelation. Through the dingy window, I glimpsed my car stuffed with 2 lives haphazardly thrown together, aiming only for distance from the ruins of experience. Gathering courage, I whispered a promise, one life I could still get right. I zipped my bulging suitcase with finality, scanning the cramped room for any last-minute items. Today was an ending, the closing of a chapter filled with betrayal, heartbreak, and finally empowerment. Soon Marlene and I would part ways at the airport to embark on uncertain futures that no longer involved the toxic Jennifer men. Marlene perched elegantly on the sagging sofa, though her normal perfectly pressed attire was rumpled after a night on the lumpy pullout. I hesitated, feeling I should say something, but uncertain where we stood after last night's emotional conversation. Before the awkward silence could stretch too long, my cell phone lit up with Theo's handsome face. Still conflicted over seeing his smile every day in my photos, I silenced the call. I owed him nothing more, especially on my last day in this godforsaken town. Let me guess, another pathetic plea for reconciliation? Marlene asked dryly. When I nodded tersely, her mouth flattened into a hard line. Clearly the consequences of his abhorrent behavior haven't fully penetrated that thick skull yet, if he believes sweet words can erase the past. I bristled slightly at her criticism. Theo cheating didn't negate over a decade together when I still sometimes slipped and thought of him as my partner rather than soon-to-be ex. Sensing my hesitation, Marlene leaned forward, eyes flashing. Elara, listen to me. Men like Theodore never change. They simply find new victims once the current one finally resists being used and lied to. You deserve so much better, and I won't have you throwing away this fresh start because of some misplaced longing for a man incapable of valuing your beautiful spirit. Her passion threw me. Marlene despised vulnerability, preferring to manipulate scenarios from behind the scenes. This fierce display revealed glimpses of the motherly protector she kept buried beneath ambition and stone-faced control. Seeing warmth emanating from someone I had long dismissed as an icy villain both rattled and touched me. Rather than grapple with complex feelings, I straightened briskly and reached for my suitcase. We should get going. I still need to drop you at the airport. The drive passed swiftly as we purposefully avoided tender topics or future plans. But pulling up to the terminal's bustling curb, melancholy still permeated the cramped space. Our paths were unlikely to ever cross again after today. Nostalgia flickered briefly for the friends we could have been under different circumstances before I quashed it down. No point getting mired in fruitless what-ifs. I climbed out and retrieved her small bag from the back seat. Facing each other squarely for likely the last time, echoes of the past hovered ghostly between us. Years of rivalry and resentment now faded into exhaustion and regret in the light of present upheaval. Surprising us both, I stepped forward and briefly hugged Marlene's fragile frame, feeling sharp shoulder blades under my palms. She squeezed back tightly for a breath before drawing up sternly, lips quivering slightly. With a mute nod that conveyed volumes, she walked briskly through the sliding doors without a backward glance. Watching her departure, I exhaled slowly, unexpectedly feeling lighter and oddly at peace. The bitter old vulture had faced her long-overdue reckoning, but the broken woman moving cautiously into an uncertain future now seemed unshackled from former bonds of perfectionism. I lingered a few moments more in the idling car, staring sightlessly across the bustling lanes of traffic. Then Hugo meowed insistently from his carrier, jolting me from troubled thoughts. Our new life awaited far from this place of ghosts and shadows. After dropping Hugo at the special pet boarding area with strict personalized care instructions, I headed toward the crowded security queues. But barely 20 steps later, familiar polished loafers appeared in my peripheral vision. I halted abruptly, heart pounding. How dare he ambush me here when I had made my wishes for no contact perfectly clear? I pivoted slowly to face Theo, taking savage satisfaction as his innately poised countenance wavered under my blistering glare. The weeks following my departure had clearly taken their toll. His Armani suit, hung loosely off a gaunt frame, and stubble peppered his normally smooth jaw. But I staunchly barricaded any softening behind bitter memories of his callous betrayals. Drawing myself up rigidly, I brushed past him without a word, refusing to indulge this confrontation or be manipulated yet again by his excuses and platitudes. But his hand gently caught my wrist, halting my furious momentum. "Alara, please wait. I know you owe me nothing after how despicably I acted. But we meant too much once for it to end this bitterly without closure. Just hear me out, and then I'll accept whatever choice you make." I wavered. His simple dignity contrasted starkly with prior vigorous denials. Sensing my hesitation, Theo guided us gently to an empty waiting area, his familiar earthy scent briefly distracting, before I caught myself leaning closer instinctively. No more damning self-deceptions. I would hear him out, but my erstwhile prince had forever forfeited the privilege of my trust. Settling reluctantly across from him, I crossed my arms and waited. Theo fiddled with his silver wedding band, gathering courage under my expectant stare. When the stretching silence became unbearable, I prompted impatiently, "Well, you insisted on this intrusion, so talk." He raked a hand through prematurely graying hair. "You deserve the full truth about her. About everything." My nails carved crescents into my palms. That wounds were still so raw, even her pronoun felt like lemon juice highlighted my pathetic inability to move on fully. Sensing my lingering fragility, Theo's eyes softened. "Alara, she never mattered. Not like you. It was just a stupid conquest to feel young again with too much booze and flattering attention." I cut him off sharply. "Your asinine midlife crisis doesn't justify the deliberate choosing of infidelity. You squandered precious years we can't recover." My voice broke on the last word. "You're completely right. Nothing forgives what I did." Theo stared beseechingly into my eyes, but hardest to admit has been facing the underlying reason this recklessness felt so compelling. He took a shuddering breath. "I was terrified of truly being there for you emotionally after the last miscarriage. Easier to escape into late nights at bars rather than wrestle with feeling like a failure as your husband." Unwelcome sympathy pricked my conscience, hearing the depth of his private demons before I set my jaw firmly. His weakness didn't exonerate deeply scarring betrayal. Sensing he hadn't earned the right to my absolution yet, Theo leaned forward urgently. "That day you collapsed in the foyer, I ignored 10 panicked messages from Julian to jet off with her instead. What kind of man abandons his wife unconscious and bleeding?" His broad shoulders shook with rare vulnerable emotion. The affair ended that very night once guilt overruled the thrill of pretended escape. But like a coward, I just doubled down on secrets instead of confessing. Despite myself, hot tears trailed down my face at the excruciating image. Seeing my distress, he cautiously extended a tentative hand. When I didn't pull away, he enveloped my icy fingers in consoling warmth. "Alara Jennings, you have been my steadfast anchor through lost jobs, family deaths, all of it." His thumbs gently traced my knuckles. "I destroyed everything good through my own weakness in failing you, and no words can ever heal that pain. He squeezed my hands softly, meeting my eyes with heartbreaking sincerity. I just needed you to know your immeasurable worth before our paths diverge for good. I stared sightlessly over his shoulder, struggling desperately to shore up crumbling defenses against this tender onslaught. But Theo misinterpreted my silence and withdrew hastily. Forgive my selfishness keeping you any longer. I wish you all the joy and peace, going forward, that you deserve. He made to stand before I gave in to the magnetic pull I had resisted for endless lonely weeks, and grabbed his wrist wordlessly. Our joined hands spoke of lingering ghosts not fully exorcised, despite determined intentions to walk away whole and healed. Come with me to grab lunch before my flight, I whispered hoarsely. We both could use the company. His eyes lit up with notes of irrepressible hope that caught traitorously in my weary heart. We meandered slowly through garishly lit terminals with hands loosely linked, the familiar intimacy both comforting and piercing after so many silent nights, strangling on angry tears into my pillow. As we dwelled in this peaceful eye in the storm of separation, I dared acknowledge how perfectly our hands still fit together, if only for a few stolen moments more. But crossing the bustling departure hall, reality intruded as my terminal flashed insistently on the screen above. I lingered reluctantly, clutching these final grains of before slipped away forever. With strength that surprised us both, I embraced him fiercely, conveying wordlessly echoes of grief over wrecked dreams and forgiveness still under construction. His lips grazed my hair, landing feather-light like a blessing. Walk forward in hope, Theo whispered. Eyes suspiciously bright, he stepped back and raised a hand in silent farewell. I strode steadily to the boarding gate without glancing backward, but as the plane engines roared to life, I pressed my palm against the window, imagining his steadfast silhouette waiting below until distance rendered us strangers once more. I gazed out the dingy bus window as the California desert peeled back, revealing saguaro-dotted vistas under cerulean skies. The burning Golden State sun was just setting behind craggy red peaks. I smiled softly, feeling possibilities stirring within me, like those hardy wildflowers I spotted blanketed alongside the highway, narrowly avoiding the brown desolation. This faded greyhound was miles removed from the privileged illusion of my former life, when spontaneous weekend getaways meant booking a lavish resort suite on Theo's black card, rather than dozing upright with questionable stains on ripped vinyl seats. Yet I had never felt freer than with the wind whipping through cracked windows as I hugged a worn postcard with a hastily circled apartment listing. The ad I had obsessively memorized was for a cozy one-bedroom casita on the outskirts of Tucson, backing up to saguaro forests and sun-baked trails. Affording the $750 monthly rent would require relying on spousal support payments from Theo for a little while longer until I found reliable work. I knew without asking Marlene was getting by on similar temporary lifeboats, whatever settlements our lawyers had wrangled from the former Jennings empire. Pride would just have to cope with necessities for now. My impulsive liberation from toxic security had to transcend fear-based decision-making. I refused to settle in meaningless jobs just for the paycheck. I craved space to rediscover my passions. As the cramped bus navigated the narrow, dusty streets of downtown Tucson after nightfall, I peered out searching for familiar landmarks from the online listing. My eager gaze soon spotted the carved oak tree dead ahead marking my destination. I quickly tugged my worn duffels down, jostling bleary passengers. Scooping up a yowling Hugo, I murmured excitedly to him as we stepped off onto the cracked sidewalk, breathing in creosote and sage-scented air. The promised carved oak stood proudly between two squat adobe homes, seemingly melded with the desert itself. My new neighbor kept a cozy, handcrafted wind chime dangling from gnarled branches that tinkled cheerfully in the warm breeze. Further down the dusty street, lights still burned cozily in low windows as families finished evening meals, faint laughter, and barked dogs echoing through the sleepy neighborhood. Drawing courage from such warm domesticity, I marched up to the small mustard-yellow duplex tucked privately in back, flowers overflowing from rusted barrels flanking the turquoise door. My new landlady, Sylvia, emerged at the sound of gravel crunching under my feet, her deeply lined and weathered face cracking into a brilliant, welcoming smile. Dried lavender sprigs woven through thin braids spilled across her faded peasant blouse as she drew me into an unexpected embrace, redolent of sweet sage and cornmeal. "Alara, so wonderful you made it safe, dear heart. Don't be shy now. Come in, come in. I have your unit all ready for occupants big and small." Her musical voice held echoes of the multicultural Southwest as she scooped up Hugo and cooed nonsense sounds at him. My anxious shoulders relaxed at her easy affection, and within 15 minutes, all my earthly belongings were tucked cozily into the lovingly decorated one-bedroom overlooking fragrant flowering bushes alive with birds. Sylvia proudly demonstrated the shiny oven and gurgling fridge she had picked up secondhand, especially with me in mind, before stuffing my hands with homemade tamales and departing with another fierce hug. Alone in the tiny haven, emotion swamped me as I sunk down on the quilted sofa, staring sightlessly at azure walls and the vibrant paintings adorning them. After so many years existing elegantly in Marlene's cold shadow, I was finally home, somewhere that felt utterly mine alone, to nurture growth rather than shrink small for approval. I didn't bother fighting grateful tears. Let them flow freely to cleanse old wounds so something fresh and resilient could take root. Even Theo's framed face smiling down from my bedside table no longer constricted my heart as it once had. Simply a bittersweet reminder that seasons change, but the essence of who we are remains if we nurture truth within. Curled under a faded quilt watching the moon rise with Hugo purring softly beside me, I made a silent pledge. Never again would anyone dictate my worth or potential. I was finally choosing to live rather than just survive. To embrace life's messy evolution on my own terms, with arms flung open wide. Tomorrow's unknowns no longer sparked fear, but rather anticipation, blooming brightly like those desert wildflowers daring to blossom against adversity. Tonight, I simply rested in my decision to thrive freely, under boundless western skies, ready to greet a new dawn. "You should have handed over control when Dad passed," Brielle's voice cut through the noise like a knife through butter. "This is our chance to sell and make a real profit." My heart stuttered as I peered around the corner, spotting my cousin deep in conversation with Ethan, my fiancé of 3 years. They huddled near the bar, oblivious to my eavesdropping presence at our winery's annual harvest party. "I'm in," Ethan murmured with a solemn nod. "We'll tell Avery after securing the deal. She won't be able to refuse once the money's on the table." Bile rose in my throat as the truth slammed into me. My own family, my supposed loved ones, plotting to steal away my father's life's work, everything I'd sacrificed to preserve. Trembling, I stormed away, desperate for space to process the gut-wrenching betrayal. Tears blurred my vision as I fled through the vineyard's rows, the muffled sounds of celebration fading behind me. How could they? After all the blood, sweat, and tears I'd poured into this place, into keeping Dad's dream alive. And Ethan? The man I'd planned to marry, willing to strip me of my legacy for profit. The vines stretched endlessly in every direction, mirroring the tangled maze of shock and rage clawing at my chest. I stumbled forward, uncaring of the twigs snagging my dress or the chill night air whipping across my face. It wasn't until I reached the secluded corner where Dad's favorite rosebush grew that I finally crumpled to the ground in anguished sobs. The petals glistened with dew, oblivious to my shattering world. After several ragged breaths, determination replaced despair. I wouldn't go down without a fight. Not while a single drop of my father's spirit flowed through these vines. If Ethan and Brielle wanted a war for the winery's soul, they'd soon discover I possessed more metal than they could ever fathom. Fueled by righteous fury, I rose and marched with renewed purpose back toward the celebration. Ethan and Brielle would never see the tempest brewing behind my controlled smile as I rejoined the crowd. Let them bask in their misguided confidence. It would make their downfall all the more catastrophic. I was the master of this vineyard, and by night's end, I'd have the perfect scheme to protect Dad's legacy at all costs. In the days following the harvest party, I played the role of the oblivious fiancé to perfection. Ethan remained affectionate, his gentle kisses and soft caresses mere rehearsed performances masking his deceit. "How was your meeting with the marketing team?" he asked over dinner one evening, his hazel eyes betraying not a glimmer of guilt. I forced a smile. Productive, we've got some exciting new campaigns in the works. Ethan nodded, shoveling a forkful of pasta into his mouth. That's great, babe. I know how hard you've been working to take the winery to new heights. The blatant hypocrisy nearly made me gag. While he spouted meaningless platitudes, I secretly gathered evidence, piecing together the full extent of his treachery with Brielle. Tapping into the winery's financial records and encrypted communications, I discovered their embezzlement stretched back months, funds they'd been funneling into an offshore account. Printouts detailing dozens of wire transfers lay scattered across my office desk like damning puzzle pieces. My blood boiled as I connected their illicit money trail to meetings with corporate bigwigs, vultures eager to devour my family's legacy. You lying, grasping snakes, I seethed through gritted teeth. The office door creaked open, and Lucia, my most trusted employee, stepped in with a concerned frown. Everything okay, Miss Connors? I waved her inside and gestured to the documents. See for yourself. My dear fiancé and cousin have been stabbing us in the back for months, setting up a sale to that blood-sucking conglomerate we've been fighting off. Lucia's eyes widened in horror as she scanned the records. Those maneuvers, how could they? Greed and self-preservation, I spat. Ethan's likely counting on making me the rank-and-file winery bitch once the deal is done. I slammed my fist on the desk, delighting in Lucia's startled flinch. But they're gravely mistaken if they think I'll roll over without bringing the entire facade crumbling down on their heads. Lucia swallowed hard, her voice wavering. What are you going to do? A wicked grin stretched across my face as the seeds of vengeance took root. I'm going to remind them why you don't dispense with honor among thieves. The next morning, I strode into Marcia Blackwood's prestigious law office, evidence folder in hand. If anyone could help dismantle Ethan and Brielle's underhanded scheme, it was Marcia, a brilliant legal shark with a reputation for devouring corporate sleazeballs. Miss Connors, her assistant, ushered me inside. Miss Blackwood is expecting you. I found the renowned attorney studying a stack of documents behind her imposing mahogany desk. Razor-sharp eyes scrutinized me over the rim of her glasses as I approached. You certainly have a flair for dramatic entrances, Marcia said dryly. I hope, for your sake, you've brought me something substantial. Wordlessly, I handed over the folder and waited as she flipped through the incriminating paperwork. Bank statements, encrypted emails, everything I'd compiled on the betrayal. Marcia's practiced mask of stoicism slipped, her eyebrows arching in disbelief. This is unbelievable, your own family conspiring against you in broad daylight. I stifled the urge to snap. Try having that realization slap you across the face. Instead, I simply nodded. Can you help me take them down? My voice remained steady, devoid of the raging storm churning beneath my composed exterior. I want to bury Ethan and Brielle under the full weight of legal and public retribution. A predatory glint flickered in Marcia's eyes, the look of a tiger scenting blood on the wind. Oh, I'll do more than that, Miss Connors. By the time we're through, their reputations and freedom will be torn asunder. They'll be left destitute, forced to slink away from this valley with their tails between their legs. My lips curved into a vindictive smile, already envisioning the devastation I'd rain down upon the traitorous snakes slithering in my midst. Over the ensuing days, Marcia and I constructed an impenetrable counteroffensive, rallying allies in preparation to obliterate Ethan and Brielle's scheme. Anthony, my winery's head vintner, eagerly supplied information to undermine their corporate dealings. Jackson, our top sales rep, helped divert funds and reroute profitable distribution contracts. Kara in marketing launched a campaign showcasing our heritage and community ties, the very soul they aimed to ravage for profit. With each Ailey recruited and asset secured, the day of reckoning crept inexorably closer. Ethan and Brielle carried on clueless, their arrogance blinding them to the crumbling ground beneath their feet. I could hardly wait to cement the trapdoor's collapse and revel in their pathetic, well-deserved downfall. The first strike hit with precise, surgical brutality. This just in. Financial records have surfaced exposing embezzlement and corporate fraud at Connor Family Vineyards, the local news anchor announced in a grave tone. Sources indicate Chief Marketing Officer Ethan Baxter and Deputy Manager Brielle Evans have been funneling company assets into overseas accounts for personal gain. I watched with wicked satisfaction as the damning report flashed on the TV, my finger hovering over the pause button. Frozen on screen, Ethan and Brielle's faces contorted in horror. A perfect captured memory. In the ensuing days, a merciless barrage of legal filings and media leaks descended upon the conspirators. Marcia worked tirelessly, slapping them with criminal charges while ensuring every salacious allegation dominated headlines. Ethan confronted me in a heated parking lot showdown, his usually polished veneer cracked and disheveled. "Why are you doing this?" he demanded through clenched teeth, eyes wild and desperate. "We were going to set you up with a nice payoff, more than enough to retire comfortably." I laughed in his face, loud and mocking. "And let you thieves bleed my father's legacy dry? Spend his life's work on foosball tables and degenerate thrill-seeking?" The venom in my tone seemed to shrink him before my very eyes. "You deluded yourself into thinking I'd just hand over the keys and walk away once the money hit my account, that I'd forsake my responsibilities, my duties as Connor heir." Poking his chest with each enunciated word, I leaned until our faces were mere inches apart. "You, Anchor, the embodiment of Napa's proud heritage they'd never uproot without a customer backlash. All its posturing about market share and consolidation swiftly crumbled in the face of such toxic optics. Other potential investors fled like scattering roaches in the light, terrified of being labeled corporate pillagers. With their options dwindling, Ethan and Brielle found themselves outmaneuvered at every turn, each frantic move, born of arrogance and desperation, easily anticipated and deflected. Soon they'd have nowhere left to squirm except directly into the pit of consequences I'd meticulously excavated. I could already envision them dangling on the precipice, one fateful shove from total disgrace and ruin. With Ethan and Brielle's scheme to sell the winery lying in ruins, it was time to set the final stage for my grand defiance. I'd lured the snakes into a corner, now to spring the trap and crush them beneath my heel once and for all. The annual Winemakers Charity Gala presented the perfect opportunity. A high-profile event with investors, media, and industry bigwigs from across the valley in attendance. Precisely the backdrop I needed to thoroughly humiliate the treacherous fools threatening my legacy. "You wanted to speak with me?" Ethan sidled up beside me, his expression a pathetic mask of defeat and confusion. Behind him, Brielle hovered nearby, shoulders slumped in dejected resignation. I regarded them both with callous appraisal. "Yes, there's an important matter we need to discuss at the gala tonight, a major announcement regarding the winery's future." Ethan's brow furrowed as he processed my words. "You mean?" "Exactly." I allowed a calculated pause, lips curving into a razor-thin smile. "I think it's time I abdicated control and allowed the next generation to steer Connor Vineyards forward, with all our supporters present to bear witness." His features slackened in apparent relief, and I had to stifle a derisive snort. If only he knew the profound depths of his delusion. I don't know what to say," he stammered out. "Thank you for finally seeing reason, Avery. I promise Brielle and I will make you proud with the new direction." "Save your platitudes." I cut him off with a dismissive wave. "Just be prepared to embrace your role on the stage tonight. It'll be a performance neither of you will ever forget." As the gala commenced a few hours later, tension simmered just beneath the celebratory surface. Ethan and Brielle worked the crowds with artificial cheer, confidence buoyed by hubris and ignorance. They fully expected this evening to mark their ascension as winery overloads, a private victory party attended by the entire valley's elite. Little did the self-deluded fools realize the event heralded loss-doomed downfall, orchestrated by the very woman they sought to disenfranchise. Their humiliation would be gloriously public, a final legacy-staining trauma to complement the mountain of legal consequences still to come. Enjoying the evening? I sidled up to them with 2 fresh glasses of crisp Chardonnay, every inch the gracious hostess. Brielle accepted her drink, green eyes glinting with avarice. "It's just the start of many more to come under our management." "About that." I raised my glass in preparation for a toast. "I believe I promised a special announcement tonight?" Ethan's face broke into an eager grin, gobbling up the bait with reckless desperation. "You finally saw the light. We're ready to lead the winery into a new prosperous era." Seizing the moment, I strode up onto the stage and seized the microphone, my voice amplifying across the hushed ballroom with authority. Esteemed guests, as many of you know, this gala celebrates not just the year's harvest, but the bonds of community, heritage, and family. I paused, letting the pregnant silence saturate the air like a heavy fog. Therefore, it is with great dismay I must reveal there are snakes in our midst. Pitching my voice to drip with disdain, I turned a piercing glare upon Ethan and Brielle's ashen faces. Snake who've been siphoning profits into offshore accounts and orchestrating an illegal sale to corporate raiders, all in a selfish ploy to steal what isn't theirs. The room erupted in shocked gasps and furious murmurs. Ethan gaped at me in abject horror, his knees visibly trembling. Score 1 for catching the rats by surprise. But take heart, my friends, I continued, allowing a vindicated smile. For I've spent months unraveling this scheme and constructed a righteous counterattack to preserve the heart and soul of Connor Vineyards. And as we speak, law enforcement is en route to apprehend the conspirators and abate this betrayal once and for all. That caused another thunderous roar to swell, this one of cheers and applause from the assembled guests. Ethan and Brielle could only stand frozen, their traitorous aspirations rejected in the most grandiose, humiliating forum imaginable. This was more than just the death of their scheme, it was the public immolation of their dreams, their reputations irrevocably stained for all to witness. Smile widening to bask in their torment, I locked eyes with Ethan, allowing my voice to rise above the raucous din in one final damning declaration. And so ends the inglorious paths of those foolish enough to betray Connor Family Vineyards. The silence that followed my declaration was electric, charged with 1,000 unvoiced gasps and accusations. Every eye in the gala burned into Ethan and Brielle, the snakes exposed in their traitorous coils. Clutching the microphone, I drank in the moment, savoring their abject humiliation as event security closed in to apprehend them. There would be no escape, no last-minute reprieve to salvage their crumbling reputations. "You lying bitch!" Brielle exploded first, always the blazing tempest to Ethan's simmering tumult. Flecks of spittle flew from her snarling lips as she wheeled on me in impotent rage. "How dare you? After everything our families sacrificed to build this place up from nothing." A cruel laugh burst from my chest, mocking and utterly devoid of mercy. "Sacrificed?" I echoed back at her venomous glare. "By stealing and scheming behind my back to rob me of my rightful inheritance? If that's the extent of your sacrifices, then allow me to return the favor." Sweeping an arm out, I gestured to the assembled crowd staring in scandalized fascination. "Esteemed guests, I give you Brielle Evans and Ethan Baxter, a contemptible pair of vipers who not only embezzled funds and orchestrated an illegal sale, but deluded themselves into thinking I'd simply hand over my legacy to their greedy clutches once the money hit my accounts." A fresh torrent of gasps and whispers rippled through the room, judgment and damnation raining down on the exposed snakes. No corner of this prestigious venue would offer them refuge, only the unforgiving glare of a community outraged by their insidious betrayal. "Well, here's your wake-up call." I locked eyes with the fuming Brielle, jaw clenched to savor her swift descent into panicked realization. "The Connors don't fold to snakes or sell our souls so easily. We have a pride and resilience that parasites like you could never comprehend." Dismissing her with a contemptuous sneer, I turned my scathing address toward the squirming Ethan. "And you, my so-called husband-to-be orchestrating a con to strip me of everything I've sacrificed for. Tell me, were you even attempting to mask your disloyalty, or just stringing me along like a blissfully ignorant puppet?" Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but any protest withered on his ashen lips beneath my blistering glare. "Save your platitudes, we both know the truth. You saw an opportunity for an easy payday. Damn whoever's lives or legacies got chewed up along the way." My fingers stabbed with each enunciated syllable, driving the humiliation deeper. "Well, you miscalculated badly, Baxter, and now you'll reap the widespread ruination you've disgraced yourselves by earning." As if on cue, the ballroom doors flew open, revealing a grim-faced Marcia Blackwood flanked by county sheriff's deputies, the legal cavalry arriving to compound the conspirators' devastation. They swept forward as twin tidal waves of dread finally crested over Ethan and Brielle's masks of feigned innocence. Excuses and justifications died on their lips, choked off by the stark ramifications crashing down upon their elaborately orchestrated scheme. Ethan turned to me, momentarily unmasked in his desperation. "Avery, please." But I cut him off with a contemptuous slash of my hand. "I don't know who you are anymore, Ethan. Only that you're just another snake unworthy of my name or legacy." His shoulders slumped just before the deputies seized his arms, the dual blows of exposure and consequence robbing him of any final defiance. Fighting back a cruel smirk of satisfaction, I handed off the microphone to the approaching Marcia and stood tall, basking in the complete conquest over those who dared imperil everything I held sacred. The sight of Ethan and Brielle being led away in shackles amid a chorus of infuriated shouts branded itself into my memory like a searing brand. A watershed moment, their pathetic hopes and conniving snuffed out, the battlefield belonging solely to the righteous victor once more. In the days following the gala, a torrential downpour of consequences deluged Ethan and Brielle's shattered world. The dominoes I'd meticulously lined up for months toppled in devastating, unrelenting succession. First came the media crucifixion, a full-court blitz of skating exposés that left no damning stone unturned. Embezzlement figures, paper trails of illicit deals, and every unsavory allegation flooded the airwaves and newspapers. Then, the corporate clients and investors rapidly distanced themselves from the toxic fallout. Distributors and joint ventures severed ties as if the conniving snakes had developed a virulent, untreatable plague. Lucrative contracts evaporated overnight, closing off any potential lifelines or escape routes. Within a week, the once burgeoning empire Ethan and Brielle envisioned lay smoldering on the funeral pyre of their treacherous designs. Watching the dominoes spiral from my winery office's floor-to-ceiling windows, I sipped a crisp Chardonnay, smoky undertones from the Heritage Vineyards crop complemented by the sweetness of hard-earned vindication. "It's all crumbling apart for them out there," Lucia murmured, mirroring my hawkish gaze. "Just like you said it would." "Of course." I swirled the glass, observing the pale liquid's lazy eddies. "Snakes like Ethan and Brielle slither on instinct and impulse. They can't help reverting to their vile natures. Snakes need to be defanged and rendered harmless before they can contaminate the surrounding environment." Lucia's brow furrowed as she processed my detached analysis. "And you're just okay with doing that to your own cousin? Your ex-fiancé?" A wintry smirk tugged at the corners of my lips. "I am the master of this vineyard, Lucia. Those sorts of personal entanglements and sentiments are luxuries I cannot afford to entertain, not when the stakes are so monumental." Shaking her head slowly, she shifted her gaze back outside. "I don't know how you have the stomach for it. All this, coldly dismantling their lives." "It's not about vengeance or settling scores," I replied evenly. This was always about upholding the values and legacy my father imparented upon these vines. Some degradation simply cannot be allowed to take root. A brief lull stretched between us as the enormity of the situation resonated. After a few thoughtful sips, I broke the silence. "We're in the final throes now. Ethan and Brielle's reputations are decimated beyond repair, their underhanded ambitions rendered stillborn." My finger traced the path of a large truck pulling away from a nearby warehouse, the last dribbles being siphoned off their illicit overseas accounts and asset seizures. Soon, their ill-gotten windfalls will be returned to their rightful place, and they'll be left as they began, common graspers stripped of all influence and credibility. A grim smile etched across my features as I envisioned them reaping the whirlwind of their own making. No prison could confine them as completely as the reputations and futures they'd willingly immolated on the altar of greed and treachery. Every eye would forever gaze upon them and see only the parasites who betrayed family and legacy for a quick payday, irredeemable snakes expelled from their padded Eden into the wilderness of permanent societal exile. A more comprehensive immolation than anything I could have orchestrated by sheer force of will. "It's the perfect karmic justice," I declared, clinking my glass against Lucia's in a muted toast. "They'll never hold power or influence in this valley or respected circles ever again." As the crystal chimed, my gaze drifted over the sprawling vineyards basking in the valley's reflected emerald glow. The spark of renewal and reinvigoration already gathered on the horizon, possibilities blossoming like a new bountiful harvest yet to be plucked. My family's righteous legacy endured, burnished anew while the snakes shriveled and expired, warnings to any who dared stake foolish claims against its roots. I would ensure the winery's spiritual heart stemmed strong and proud in the aftermath. This land and its fruits would continue upholding the honored Connor's name long after Ethan and Brielle faded from memory like the meaningless parasites they were. Order had been restored, karmic balance achieved with a ruthless, defensive precision. In the aftermath of Ethan and Brielle's disgrace, an unsettled quiet descended upon the vineyards, the calm before a new season of growth and rebirth took root. I stood alone amid the pruned vines, calloused fingers tracing the gnarled bark, as the first whispers of spring's rejuvenation danced on the crisp morning breeze. The heady, fertile scents served as a poignant reminder of the perpetual cycles governing our world. Decay always preceded new life flourishing from the fallow remnants. Closing my eyes, I inhaled deeply and permitted myself a faint, rueful smile. Ethan and Brielle were experiencing that harsh transition now, reaping the bitter harvest they'd sown through arrogance and betrayal. Once vitally connected to this sacred valley's lifeblood, they now found themselves permanently severed, withered husks left behind as the next evolution in Connor Vineyards progressed without them. "You look entirely too philosophical for someone clutching pruning shears." Anthony's gruff voice shook me from my reverie. I cracked open one eye to find the cantankerous old vintner shuffling up beside me, shotgun slung over his shoulder in his usual curmudgeonly fashion. "Just savoring the turning of seasons," I replied, nodding toward the replenished vines already studding with pale green buds, contemplating the cycles that govern all aspects of life. Anthony snorted, hawking a thick globule of phlegm into the pristine soil. "If you're searching for some grand metaphor about your jackass ex-fiancé and money-grubbing cousin, you're barking up the wrong goddamn vineyard." I fought back a chuckle, recognizing Anthony's typical bluster. "Not at all," I assured him, merely appreciating the moments of peace and clarity before we dive headlong into another demanding harvest. The brusque old man gave a grudging nod, squinting out over the sea of vibrant green shoots stretching toward the horizon. "Well, at least you finally evicted those parasitic rats mucking about in the wine cellar," he growled. "Spat enough dealing with aphids and mildew without vermin infestations threatening to strangle the whole operation." His crass wisdom struck an unexpected chord of sanguine appreciation within me. Somehow, Anthony's earthy pragmatism invoked the spirit of these lands more than any fragrant spring zephyr or poetic Renaissance musings could muster. Some legacies endured not through florid romanticisms, but by the hard-bitten determination to preserve their essence through every cycle of death and rebirth. Dad had that stubborn tenacity, and now, in the aftermath of my own battle to safeguard our proudest fruits, it seemed I had awoken to it as well. Nodding toward the distant winery complex peeking over the knolls, I voiced the conviction blossoming in my chest. "I want to expand our attractions and hospitality ventures," I declared. "Lavish new visitor experiences to take this place to even greater heights. Show the world we're not some quaint foothill boutique, but a leading cultural anchor as timeless as the grapes we cultivate." Anthony regarded me with one bushy-thing eyebrow arched. "Mighty ambitious talk, Miss Connor." A cantankerous smirk tugged at the corner of his cracked lips. "Hope you've got the grit to back it up once the snakes come slithering back." My fingers tightened around the pruning shear's worn wooden grip, drawing reassuring strength from its hewn permanence. "I'm counting on it," I replied with a feral grin. "The vines and soil have tasted treachery. They'll never allow anything besides the purest offerings to take nourishment again. Let the serpents bare their fangs, we'll simply lop off their skulls and continue flourishing as we were meant to." Anthony held my gaze for a long moment before unleashing a gravely chuckle that reverberated across the peaceful vineyard like a rollicking thunderclap. "Well, I'll be damned," he sputtered between wheezing guffaws. "You've finally grown a nice pair of auteur Italian grapes, haven't you, girl?" My laughter joined his, the twin reverberations mingling and trilling through the awakening vines, harbingers of the revitalized spirit and enterprise taking root. As our mirth gradually subsided into a comfortable quiet, I gazed out over my family's verdant domain with a renewed sense of purpose igniting within. No longer would I merely aim to preserve these hallowed lands. That passive existence felt unbefittingly hollow in the wake of my trials. From the ashes of duplicity and desecration, a new, more ambitious path beckoned to be forged. One that would elevate Connor Vineyards to unprecedented glories and esteem its founder could scarcely have envisioned. But I sensed Dad's spirit smiling down upon the endeavor, regardless, for he would surely recognize the resilience and singular drive propelling his heir's ascent from turmoil to triumph. The snakes had been vanquished. Now it was time for the phoenix to stretch its wings and soar toward new promised harvests. The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the gut. I froze in the hallway, hands trembling, as the conversation in the living room pierced my ears. "We need a new wife for Mitchell who can give us a grandson to carry on the family name," Franklin's gruff voice resonated. "That Adrienne is a failure. 15 years and she couldn't produce a male heir." My heart pounded, breath growing shallow. This couldn't be happening. "I agree," Louise chimed in, her tone laced with disdain. "It's time we found Mitchell a younger, more fertile replacement." Mitchell remained silent, his lack of objection a deafening betrayal. I clutched the wall for support, fighting the urge to burst through the door. How could the man I loved, the man whose family I had sacrificed everything for, be so complicit in this vile scheme? "Perhaps a woman from a respectable family this time," Franklin continued, driving the knife deeper. "Not some inexperienced nobody like Adrienne." Tears stung my eyes as their venomous insults lacerated my soul. All the belittling, the years of walking on eggshells in my own home, it had led to this. My disposal like a worn piece of furniture. The room fell silent. I held my breath, praying they wouldn't discover me eavesdropping. Footsteps approached, and I scrambled back towards the stairs, my heart in my throat. As I reached the top step, Ella appeared at the end of the hallway. "Mom, is everything okay?" I startled, her voice shattering my frantic haze. My beautiful, innocent daughter, would she become another casualty of this family's ruthless ambition? "Everything's fine, sweetie," I lied, forcing a smile as I pulled her into an embrace. "Just got a little dizzy, that's all." As I stroked her hair, my mind whirled. This couldn't go on any longer. Enough was enough. Those vicious snakes downstairs had awoken a protective fury within me, one that would stop at nothing to shelter my daughter from their toxicity. We had sacrificed too much already. My once blossoming career, laid to waste years ago when Mitchell insisted I be a stay-at-home wife to appease his controlling parents. All the demeaning comments, the constant dismissal of my role in this household, I had endured it for Ella's sake, hoping to preserve some semblance of family. But now they sought to tear us apart, to discard me and destroy the life I had desperately clung to. Not anymore. Those delusional fools had ignited an unquenchable fire within me. I would burn their twisted legacy to the ground. Sleep evaded me that night, as the venomous words replayed in my mind like a broken record. I tossed and turned, haunted by the prospect of being torn from my own family by those deceitful vipers downstairs. Mitchell remained oblivious, snoring beside me as if his parents hadn't just signed my death warrant. How could he be so blind, so resigned to their manipulative ways? The memories came flooding back, the demoralizing comments about my inability to birth a son, the snide remarks diminishing my role as a wife and mother. All along, it had been building towards this sick ultimatum. As dawn broke, I rose quietly, my restless mind swirling with anger and determination. Peering into Ella's room, I watched her sleep peacefully, her face a vision of tranquil innocence. She deserved so much better than this twisted farce of a family. Descending the stairs, I braced myself for the onslaught that would come. Franklin and Louise were already seated at the breakfast table, their expressions stern as gunshots. Well, if it isn't our useless daughter-in-law," Franklin sneered as I entered. "Did you finally come to your senses about providing us with a real heir?" My fists clenched, nails digging into my palms. "How dare you treat me with such disrespect in my own home?" Louise scoffed. "This is our home, you ungrateful fool, and you'll soon learn your place when Mitchell finds himself a new wife." The audacity of her words ignited my fury. "Over my dead body, I've sacrificed everything for this family, subjecting myself to your demeaning insults and archaic expectations. Expectations you failed to meet, Franklin countered, his eyes narrowing to callous slits. 15 years without a grandson. You're the failure here, not us. I recoiled as if struck, their cruelty seeming to manifest as physical blows against my psyche. Mitchell entered, his brow furrowed. What's with all the yelling? Your precious wife has finally found her voice, Louise spat. Pity she didn't put that fire into producing an heir. Mitchell's gaze fell, his jaw tensing but no words escaping his lips. My heart sank. He wouldn't defend me, not against his poisonous parents. In that moment, any remnant of love I felt withered on the vine. This marriage, this family, it was all a lie perpetuated by heartless tyrants obsessed with legacy over humanity. But I wouldn't go down without a fight. If they thought they could bully me into quiet submission, they were gravely mistaken. Stealing my nerves, I met Franklin's menacing glare with unwavering defiance. You want a new woman for your spawn? You'll have to kill me first, because I'll burn this whole damn facade to the ground before letting you inflict your soulless dominance over me or my daughter. Their stunned silence spoke volumes. They had awoken a vengeful spirit they couldn't tame. Let the games begin. In the aftermath of my defiant outburst, a tense silence blanketed the house. Franklin and Louise avoided me like the plague, scowling whenever our paths crossed. Mitchell remained his typical apathetic self, seemingly oblivious to the war brewing under his own roof. My sole solace came from Ella, whose bright spirit served as a beacon during those turbulent days. But even she couldn't the darkness creeping into her eyes, the byproduct of this family's endless toxicity. Mom, why do Grandpa and Grandma always treat you like that? She asked one afternoon as we prepared dinner. I froze, uncertain how to respond without shattering her innocence. They're just set in their ways, honey. Old-fashioned thinking. Her brow furrowed. But the way they talk to you, it's not right. Sliding the casserole into the oven, I pulled her into a tight embrace, my heart aching at her precocious awareness. She deserved so much better than this poisonous environment. A knock at the door interrupted our moment. I answered to find Leo, one of the graphic designers from my former workplace, standing on the doorstep. Leo, what are you doing here? I tried calling, but you didn't answer, he said, wringing his hands nervously. I have some things I need to tell you, in private. Something in his tone hinted at its importance. Of course, come in. As we settled in the living room, Leo's usual cheerful demeanor was replaced by a somber frown. Adrian, I don't know how to say this. My heart raced, fearing the worst. What is it? He exhaled deeply. It's about Mitchell's family business. There are rumors circulating about illegal practices, tax evasion, shady dealings, you name it. I wanted to give you a heads up. The air left my lungs in a forceful gust. Of course, why was I even surprised at this point? Franklin's obsession with legacy must have clouded any semblance of ethics or morality. Are you sure about this? I pressed. An idea sparked in my mind, a possible path to freedom from this wretched family's clutches. Leo nodded solemnly. I've heard it from multiple sources. Just be careful, Adrian. These aren't the type of people you want to cross. As if on cue, Franklin's booming voice echoed through the hall. Who are you talking to, you insolent? He stopped short at the sight of Leo, his expression contorting into a mask of fury and trepidation. In that fleeting moment, I glimpsed the panic in the old bastard's eyes. He knew, and he knew that I knew. No longer would we cower under the weight of their contemptible actions. Armed with this newfound knowledge, the shackles began to loosen. Everything okay, Adrian? Leo's concerned voice shattered the tension. I met Franklin's widening glare with a subtle smirk. Everything's just fine. In fact, it's better than it's been in a long time. The game was afoot, the first counterattack in my quest to dismantle their toxic empire. Justice would be served, by any means necessary. Franklin and Louise descended upon me like a pack of rabid wolves the following day. Their faces were twisted into snarling masks of rage, eyes burning with unbridled fury. Who was that man in our home yesterday? Franklin spat, slamming his fist on the kitchen counter. Bringing strange men around without our permission? Louise crowded me against the refrigerator, her thin lips curled into a sneer. Trying to find a replacement for our pathetic son already? You conniving little. That's enough. I silenced her tirade, squaring my shoulders in defiance. That strange man is a former colleague. Unlike you two, he actually treats me with basic human decency. Franklin's eyes narrowed to predatory slits. Watch your tone, girl. This is still our house. For now, I muttered under my breath, just loud enough for his ears to prick up. Before he could respond, Mitchell's oblivious voice rang out from the living room. Mom, Dad, are we still going to Aunt Kathy's party tonight? As if a switch had flipped, Franklin and Louise's faces melted into grandfatherly masks of benevolence. Of course, son, Franklin called out jovially. We'll be right there. With one final scathing glare in my direction, they disappeared down the hallway, their sickening charade already in full swing. I doubled over, hands bracing against the counter as I struggled to catch my breath. This incessant gaslighting and emotional whiplash left me constantly on edge, my defenses forever raised. The party that evening was a waking nightmare. Kathy's lavish home was filled with Franklin and Louise's elitist cohorts, their fake smiles and vapid conversations sapping my will to exist. Mitchell reveled in the attention, basking in his family's twisted vision of success. As the evening descended into drunken revelry, Franklin seized the moment to lay into me once more. "Everyone, may I have your attention?" he bellowed, silencing the gathered guests. Here it comes, the public debasement he seemed to relish dishing out. "I'd like to make a toast," he continued, swirling his glass of scotch, "to my wonderful family, the backbone that has allowed our business to thrive all these years." Obediently, Mitchell and Kathy's family raised their glasses in celebration. My stomach turned at the sycophantic display. "And a special toast." Franklin leveled his reptilian glare at me, a sinister grin creeping across his face. "To my dear daughter-in-law, Adrienne, who has graced us with her boundless love and support for over 15 blessed years." The jeers and chuckles erupted immediately, raucous laughter echoing through the opulent hall. I fought back hot tears, my cheeks burning crimson with humiliation as all eyes bored into me. "What's the matter, dear?" Louise sneered, her voice dripping with malice. "No son to help carry on the family legacy?" That was it, the final indignity I could withstand. A familiar fire erupted in my soul, scorching away any remaining chains that once bound me to this abusive fiasco. I locked eyes with Franklin, my gaze hardening into steel-forged resolution. "You'll get your heir, Franklin, one way or another." His smug smirk faltered ever so slightly at my ominous words. The game was evolving now, the gloves coming off in this nightmarish battle of wills. There would be no more hollow compromises or feeble acquiescence. The avenging flame had been lit. In the wake of that disastrous party, a calm determination settled over me. No more would I cower under Franklin and Louise's twisted reign of terror. The path forward was clear. I would free myself and Ella from their poisonous clutches, no matter the cost. The first step required fortifying my defenses. I reached out to Leo, confiding in him the full extent of the abuse and degradation I had endured over the years. To his credit, he didn't flinch or judge, he simply listened with a compassionate ear. "You can't keep living like this, Adrienne," he said, after I had unloaded the full weight of my tortured story. "This kind of toxicity, it's soul-crushing." I nodded warily. "I know, but it's not just about me anymore. I need to get Ella away from their influence before it's too late." Leo leaned forward, his expression one of grim determination. "Then you have to get out. Both of you, clean break and start over somewhere new." The thought simultaneously exhilarated and terrified me. Could I really just uproot my entire life and flee from Mitchell's family? From the man I had once loved? But one glance at the photo of Ella on my dresser steeled my resolve. She was worth fighting for, worth sacrificing everything to liberate us both. "You're right," I said, meeting Leo's gaze with newfound conviction. "I've let them control me for far too long. It's time I took my life back." A subtle smile played across Leo's lips. "I might know someone who can help with that, if you're serious." My heart raced, though not with fear, with the thrilling embrace of taking that first defiant step. I'm dead serious. Over the next few weeks, the plan took shape. Leo connected me with a contact who could provide new identities and credentials for me and Ella. A fresh start, far away from Franklin's poisonous empire. I also began diligently documenting every instance of their abhorrent behavior, recording conversations with a hidden device to preserve evidence of their threats and mistreatment. The pieces were falling into place. Of course, severing ties required money, my own savings having long been drained, financing their lavish lifestyle. So I did what any reasonable person would. I began systematically pillaging their household accounts, siphoning off enough to secure a new home and transition into this new life. It was a heady rush, chipping away at the foundation of their control with every covert transfer. With each withdrawal, I could taste the sweet liberation inching ever closer. The final puzzle piece fell into place when Leo approached me one afternoon, a modest grin adorning his face. "You'll never guess what just happened," he began, unable to contain his excitement. "One of the ad agencies I applied to, they want me, a senior design role in Denver." My eyes widened at the implication. Denver, over 1,000 miles away, far enough to escape this waking nightmare permanently. "Leo, that's incredible," I gushed, pulling him into an appreciative embrace. As we separated, his expression turned serious once more. "You know, they'd be insane not to want to bring you aboard, too. With your portfolio and experience?" I felt my heart swell with hope. "Are you saying?" A sly grin answered my unfinished query. "Let's just say your escape plan just got a hell of a lot more real." Giddy excitement bubbled within me. This was it. The rebirth I had dreamed of for years, but never imagined possible. The shackles of Franklin's tyranny were rusting away with each passing day. I was ready to breathe free again. The weeks flew by in a frenzied blur as Leo and I put the final pieces of our meticulously crafted escape into place. With each passing day, my heart raced with the tantalizing promise of imminent freedom from Franklin's toxic stranglehold. And yet, a part of me couldn't shake the nagging sense of obligation, the need to administer one final, righteous act of defiance before fleeing into the great unknown. It was during one of my covert recording sessions that the answer revealed itself, Franklin's very words providing the cosmic green light I had been seeking. "Told Henderson we'd have those shipments mislabeled and across the border by Friday," he grumbled to Louise in the study one evening. "That money launderer better hold up his end of the bargain this time." Money laundering and smuggling, the illegal dealings Leo had forewarned me about, now confirmed in high-definition audio quality. My chest tightened with perverse validation. This was it, the damning evidence that could bring their empire crumbling down around their rotten cores. Although delivering this recording to the authorities risked exposing my own culpability, the temptation to rain righteous fury upon their deceitful heads proved too delicious to resist. The day before our scheduled departure, with our falsified documents and new lives prepped for Denver, I decided to enact my parting salvo. As Mitchell and his simpering parents gathered to watch another mind-numbing sitcom rerun, I slipped the recording onto an unmarked disc and mailed it with an anonymous tip. My heart hammered as I sealed the envelope, half expecting Franklin to somehow sniff out my act of rebellion and retaliate. But the night passed like any other, filled with their meaningless droning and self-congratulatory posturing. Ella and I made our move the following morning, both of us dragging lightly packed luggage towards the awaiting taxi. Franklin and Louise were conveniently detained at some charity brunch, while Mitchell had already departed for the office. I steeled myself as I turned towards the home that had been my gilded prison for over a decade and a half, fighting back the urge to spit venom in its direction. Instead, I allowed the faintest hint of a smile to grace my lips as one fleeting thought carried me forward. Enjoy the reckoning, you bastards. The voyage to Denver passed in a dreamlike trance of giddy liberation. Gone were the weighted stares and snide remarks, replaced by the purifying vistas of a new frontier blurring past the taxi's windows. It was here, in a picturesque downtown loft that Leo had arranged for us, that the first reports began trickling in. Speculative mumblings online of Mitchell's family business being raided by federal agents. Allegations of fraud and financial improprieties. Each refresh of my burner phone's browser revealed further details of the proverbial House of Cards collapse. Overseas accounts seized, assets frozen, the entire rotten family in for questioning amidst a sordid firestorm of scandal. I absorbed it all with a heady mix of savage satisfaction and deeply rooted melancholy. As much as I had longed for this karmic reckoning, a small part of my heart ached for the good man Mitchell once was before becoming completely ensconced in his family's depravity. but that man was long dead now, replaced by a shell of obedient compliance. I had done what was necessary to save myself, and more importantly, to preserve Ella's innocence from their corruptive grasp. As the first traces of a Rocky Mountain sunset bled through our loft's picture windows, I felt Ella's small hand slipping into my own. Her warm smile was the reassuring balm I needed in that moment. "It's going to be okay now, isn't it, Mom?" I pulled her close, planting a tender kiss on her forehead as I committed to the words that would steer us forward into this new beginning. "Yes, my sweet girl. From now on, everything is going to be okay." The images flooded the news cycle in the days that followed. A disgraceful parade of perp walks and mugshots featuring Franklin, Louise, and their once illustrious family of criminal associates. Seeing those smug, condescending faces twisted into masks of abject humiliation filled me with a nauseating sense of gratification. The mighty patriarchs had fallen, brought low by the very greed and egomania that had fueled their toxic empire. They were finished, their hollow legacy cratering into a scorched pit of legal ruin and insolvency. A chapter of our lives that had once seemed inescapable was now drawing to a brutal, definitive close. My burner phone rang incessantly those first few weeks, Mitchell's number flashing across the screen like a deranged stalker. I never answered, of course. What could he possibly say to excuse his willing complicity in their depravity? To make amends for the years of emotional and psychological torment he enabled? No, the Mitchell I had loved was gone, forever sullied by an obsession with status and his family's perverse value system. He had made his bed, soiling the once pristine sheets with greed and moral bankruptcy. Now he could lie in it. The media fanfare surrounding the case was insatiable. Every tawdry detail, every allegation of financial chicanery splashed across the front pages in grandiose headlines: "Empire of Deceit, Family Business Revealed as Criminal Front." A part of me couldn't help but revel in the shameless rubbernecking. These were the very same high society elites who had once revered Franklin and his brood, suckling from the teat of their ill-gotten riches and high-minded heirs. Now those same sycophantic leeches were lining up for a front-row seat to this grotesque public lynching. Through it all, Ella remained my unshakable pillar of strength and clarity. While the news broadcasts recounted each sordid revelation with rabid indignation, her gentle hand would find mine, calming eyes reminding me of what truly mattered. We were free from their venomous clutches, the scourge of their poisonous influence exorcised by the brilliant light of justice. In time, even my own name would occasionally slip into the news cycle, comment sections speculating about the disillusioned wife who had finally had enough, who brought the whole rickety facade tumbling down. Each mention sparked a defiant fire within me, emboldening my sense of righteousness in the face of those who still sought to cast aspersions. They didn't see me as a victim who escaped, who reclaimed her autonomy by whatever means were available. No, in their privileged eyes I was simply another pariah to condemn, a filthy rat who had abandoned the sinking ship of family values and reputation maintenance. But I didn't need their hollow approval or shallow acceptance any longer. Those days of deference were buried, replaced by an awakened sense of purpose instilled by the mere act of perseverance. When the smoke finally cleared, our fractured little family would emerge from the rubble, hardened but victorious. And emerge we did, first in a modest two-bedroom flat near Leo's design firm, then slowly blossoming into an idyllic new life as the court-appointed restitution checks began to roll in. With each deposit, I could sense Ella's spirit elevating, her once-dimmed sparkle reigniting in the warm glow of our freedom. We were more than survivors. We were the rising phoenix, scorched wings spreading wide to embrace a vibrant new reality far removed from that warped paradigm. No longer bound by poisonous pedigree or archaic patriarchal values, our truth finally unfurled for the world to witness. The apple never fell far from the tree after all. Sometimes they simply chose to forge a brand new orchard of their own making. The years melted away in a surreal blur of newfound tranquility and hard-earned growth. As Mitchell's family circus careened further into legal purgatory, Ella and I steadily rebuilt our lives from those traumatic rubble heaps. Denver proved to be the dream reboot we had so desperately craved, a world away from the suffocating toxicity of our former existence. Leo's design agency was a welcoming haven, the creative team treating me like a long-lost comrade rather than an outcast pariah. It was there, developing cutting-edge ad campaigns in a nurturing environment, that I finally rediscovered the spark that had set my soul afire all those years ago. The passion, the drive, the addictive thrill of visual storytelling, it all came roaring back with amplified intensity. While I thrived professionally, Ella's own transformation left me in awestruck admiration. The once shy, withdrawn young girl had blossomed into a confident, brilliant young woman, top of her class and already fielding inquiries from elite universities across the country. Our cozy two-bedroom flat, a humble refuge in those shaky early days, steadily gave way to an airy downtown loft teeming with contemporary furnishings and Ella's vibrant artwork adorning the exposed brick walls. A canvas of her own reinvention, a physical manifestation of how far we had come. Holidays and special occasions, once tainted by Franklin's looming specter of scorn, became cherished celebrations sans judgment or archaic expectations. Blissfully ordinary rituals like baking pies for Thanksgiving or stringing up twinkling lights for Christmas filled our beings with joy rather than dread. At last we were beholden only to our own values, our own visions of what constituted a life well lived. No more pandering to hollow ideals or self-righteous blowhards obsessed with appearances over human dignity. Of course, the legal maelstrom endured like a nagging pop-up ad you could never quite close. Depositions and court dates, investment account audits, and impassioned victim statements. It seemed there was no end to the punitive wrangling over Mitchell's family's illegally acquired holdings and business entities. Through it all, I steadfastly refused to let the toxicity seep back into our reclaimed serenity. Gone were the days of bending to their antiquated will, of allowing them to extort my happiness and autonomy. Ella was my singularly empowering force now, her dazzling smile and academic accolades the only lingering proof I required of our profound metamorphosis. Then came the day I'll never forget. Ella's high school graduation party in our open-air loft, surrounded by Leo and her beaming new social circle of creatives and young progressives. A joyous kaleidoscope of positive energy in sharp contrast to the grotesque farce of that Aunt Kathy gala years prior. I watched my daughter mingle and exude self-assured warmth with a surreal sense of catharsis and validation. This beaming aura of confidence and freedom, with not a trace of familial anguish to restrain her effervescent spirit, it was more than I could have ever dreamed for her. In that moment, as the celebratory chatter echoed through our vibrant living space, I finally exhaled the last lingering twinges of psychological shrapnel. The looking glass had rematerialized into a shining reflection of succor and empowered rebirth, our journey from subjugation to self-actualization solidifying into an unblemished truth. Those reconstructive years had molded us into modern warriors, philosophers of the human condition emerging from the fires of domestic purgatory, tempered by the flames, yet nor vindicated by the righteous path we had chosen to carve through the shadows of oppression. And as Ella embraced me with glistening eyes and a radiant smile, I knew our next chapter was only just beginning to unfurl its magnificent wings.